Cool. Hello. Can everyone hear me all right? Nice one. Thanks for bearing with me. Very quick change over there. So, welcome to my talk. I'm going to be talking to you today about Blazor and Tailwind CSS. These are two technologies that I'm pretty enamored with at the moment. Yeah, I've talked a few times about Blazor. It's possibly the best technology that's ever been invented, ever. And the solution to all front-end problems. No, I'm joking. But yeah, they're two technologies that I'm very, very sort of enamored with, and these are also two technologies that we use at the company I work for. So I'm going to talk to you about this as well from the perspective of someone who's actually doing this for real. And these two technologies are definitely very interesting things. Just to quickly introduce myself, so my name is Chris. I'm a principal software engineer at Deployed. We're a UK-based startup. As I mentioned, we're using Blazor, we're using the whole .NET stack, and we also use Tailwind as well. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I have been for about 3 years now. I do some blogging at chrissainty.com, but I've kind of not been doing much of that for the last 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, because I've decided to write a book, because that's always a fun thing to do. And that's finally finished now, so that's good. And that's actually going to be going to print in the next few weeks. So that's nice to see that project come to an end. And I also do some open source work. So I have various packages under an organization called Blazor. So there's local storage stuff in there, there's modals and toasts and what have you to help you build sort of applications with Blazor a little bit easier. So anyway, enough about me. Let's get into things. So we're going to start with the basics here. So we're going to talk firstly a bit about what Tailwind is and why it's different to other CSS frameworks you may have used. And then we'll move over to Visual Studio and we'll do some code demos. So we'll actually look at how we can integrate Tailwind into a Blazor solution, because Tailwind's a little bit different to other CSS things. And yeah, we'll see how that works, and we'll see if we can build some interesting stuff with Blazor and Tailwind. So what is Tailwind CSS? Well, Tailwind CSS is what's known as a utility-based CSS framework. So what this means is that Tailwind is full of lots of atomic style classes, okay? They're very small, very, very focused. Usually they're focused on a single CSS property, okay? So you add a single class to manipulate a single property. Now, this is different to other frameworks like Bootstrap is probably the obvious one to compare to, because most of us have probably used Bootstrap at some point, which I would class that as a component-based CSS framework. Now, what I mean by that is when you go and use something in Bootstrap, you usually go to the docs and you go and get a card component. And you copy the markup and the classes, and you get a card that looks like it does in their docs. If you want an alert, you go and copy that markup with those classes, you get an alert that looks like it does in their docs. Same for buttons, okay? Now this kind of leads to the scenario that happened, which was where every Bootstrap site, well, every site ended up looking like Bootstrap. And that is one of the issues with using pre-built CSS frameworks, that you end up sort of using components relatively as is, and things sort of start to look the same. That doesn't really happen with Tailwind, because Tailwind doesn't actually ship with any pre-made components. Okay? The idea with Tailwind is that we compose these atomic classes together in order to create a unique design. Now, if you're not particularly into design, this can sound a little bit intimidating, which is fair enough. But Tailwind actually does have some pre-made components available to you as kind of a separate thing. So there's some free community options, and then the actual Tailwind people themselves have another product called Tailwind UI, which is some paid for pre-made components, so you can invest in those if you want to. But what I really like about Tailwind CSS is I do like to do a little bit of design work, and it's nice to be able to create something that's a little bit more unique. The other thing that I tend to find when I work with Tailwind, it's actually very, very quick to work with compared to other frameworks. Now, the reason for that is that in Tailwind, you pretty much never write CSS, which is a really interesting sort of thought when you're building front-end apps. I've never been able to use Bootstrap as is, so I've always, at some point, ended up having to write some custom classes. You have to manipulate things. If you do want to do something different to how Bootstrap has done it, you are in a world of either editing their base Sass files, or you are going to be overriding their classes, or whatever. And that can be a real pain. I do not write, like I say, very much custom CSS with Tailwind at all. And in fact, I'm going to make a promise to you on this stage right now that through the rest of this talk, you are not going to see me write a single CSS property out inside of any of the demos that I'm going to show you later on. Although I will get a little bit close on that at one point, but it's technically true. Cool. So let's have a look at an actual example of this. So this is, in fact, the card component from Bootstrap's documentation site. And this is what I mean by a component. So we have an outer div with a class of card on it. And then we have various child elements after that that have specific classes to do specific things. Now, this is a little bit customizable. So like if you, say, don't want the image, you just don't do the image with the card image top class on it. And that's fine. You can add a button to this, and you can kind of play around with the structure a little bit. But largely, you're kind of going to get what you get. So we can actually replicate this in Tailwind, okay? So this is what that same component would look like if we wrote it in Tailwind. So a little bit different, a few more classes, but we're going to work through them, okay? So on that top outer div, we're going to start off by adding flex and flex col. Now this means that we're going to use flexbox in order to position everything, and flex col is to do with the flex direction. So what this means is it's going to stack all of the child elements up as a column, okay? And then you can just see hopefully just about see on the screen there, but there's a shadow underneath that card component, and that's what shadow LG does, large shadow. Moving on to the image, we've got rounded T. Now you probably can't quite see it here, but there's very, very lightly rounded corners on the top of that image, and rounded T rounds the top corners. H40 is to do with height of 40. Now 40 isn't actually a pixel value or a rem value, it actually maps to a value in a design system. Now that design system is a really important point about Tailwind, and we'll come back to that in a minute. P4 is padding 4, again, design system. We've got text gray 800, that's the text color, and the gray 800, again, is to do with the design system. We'll touch on that in a sec. And then the H5, text LG, large text, font semi-bold, MB, margin bottom 2, and then text base, which is just a text base size. So what I hope you can sort of gather from this is that once you start to learn what Tailwind's naming convention is, you can basically read the styling of any kind of elements in your markup. And this is where I feel that a lot of the productivity comes with Tailwind, because you don't change files. If I'm styling a piece of markup, I only work with that markup. I just put those classes in. I'm not jumping around between that and a CSS file, writing out custom classes, going back over my HTML, applying it. Did that work? Okay, you kind of really speed up that loop. Now, I mentioned design systems. Tailwind is basically one big design system, okay? And this is a really big selling point, because design systems are good. They constrain us, because when you've got sort of any and every option available to you, sometimes choosing something can be very difficult. You end up in analysis paralysis. But Tailwind's design system gives you some constraint. Also means that you can get some consistency, okay? One of the things that I tend to find with Bootstrap-based sites is when you do start writing these custom classes, if you have an app that gets big, you tend to find that the same things get replicated. What you also find is that values don't stay consistent. So you might agree on a certain level of padding, okay? But then someone does it at 14 pixels, and then someone does a class 3 months later, and that's 16 pixels, and then you get another one that's 12. But it's in a ginormous CSS file that's 300, 400, 500 lines long, and nobody's scrolling up and down to check that consistency. With a design system, you can kind of use that constraint a lot more. And because everything's in the markup, it's far easier to find something to compare against. The other nice thing is if you do have a design team, you can actually work with them to codify your design language, okay? And you can sit down with them, you can codify it into Tailwind's configuration, and then you can be much more confident that you're using the right color, okay, or the right spacing, or whatever it happens to be. This design system, however, does make using Tailwind slightly more complicated than something like Bootstrap. Okay, so with Bootstrap, you can just basically take a CSS file, you can add a link to it in your HTML, and you're good to go. You can just start writing out your styles. That's not the case with Tailwind. Tailwind has to be built. Okay, and the reason it has to be built is because Tailwind can generate I think it's a 20 meg CSS file if every single option is turned on. And this was the problem with Tailwind prior to version 3, which came out at the end of last year. So what used to happen with Tailwind was that you had a set of sensible defaults turned on, okay? And that would generate a CSS file in dev that might be around sort of 3, 4, 5 meg, something like that. And you could obviously turn on any other bits you needed. And then when you wanted to actually go to production, you could do some stuff called purging, where you can pass in the files that have Tailwind classes in them, and Tailwind's compiler would basically look at what you use, and it would strip out everything that you don't use, and you get a smaller file, okay? But that will change with Tailwind v3. They moved to a completely different engine for doing this. They moved to what they call the JIT engine. Now, this is really cool, because what it means is every option is turned on by default. What you do is when we configure Tailwind initially, we have to pass in the files that it should watch for the where we're going to basically apply the utility classes to. And every time we apply one and save that file, the JIT engine picks that up and it on the fly recompiles the CSS file to include that new utility class. So what it means is when we're working in development, we're actually working with the same file that we would get in production. Okay, so it's quite cool, but it does mean that we've got some extra steps. So in terms of what we can configure, there's color palettes in Tailwind, okay? So this is an example of one. They range from different shades. So we have 50, which is the lightest shade of any color, and 900, which is the darkest. Ships through 22 colors by default, so it gives you a pretty good starting point. You can, as I said, you can customize all this, so you can either override the existing palette, cancel it all out, and just put in the stuff that you want, or you can extend it. So once you've kind of configured this up in the configuration file, various utility classes can then use colors. So using them looks like this. So if I want to say I want to color some text in a certain way, I just say text, color, and whatever shade I want to use. Same with background. I just do BG, color, and shade. Okay. Spacing, that's another thing. Hopefully it's just about big enough. So this is what I was talking about, the mapping. So on that first column on the left-hand side there, that's the number that you're going to reference in your markup, okay? So that's that H40 that I mentioned earlier. And that then maps to a rem or a pixel value, depending on which particular one you're using. The nice thing about this as well is, like I said, it's all centrally managed. So if you do ever decide that 40 shouldn't be, I don't know, whatever it is by default, it's about 5 rem or 6 rem or something like that. You want it to be 8, well, you can just change it in the design system. You don't have to go and change all your markup because there's a bit of an abstraction there. So that's quite useful. And again, this is how you'd use it. So this is, you get various utility classes that can then access this spacing scale. So padding, width, height, margins, all those types of things. The other cool thing that Tailwind has in it is variants, okay? So what are variants? Well, variants are things like pseudo classes. So you would know them as things like hover effects, odd even effects on rows, first, last, stuff like that. You can do all of that with Tailwind, okay? So again, we can configure all the variants that we'd want. These are kind of, there's pretty much everything you want is pretty much there out of the box now with kind of V3 and the JIT engine. This is a lot of the stuff that you used to have to turn on, but it's there by default now, which is quite cool. And they're just used like this. If I want to do a hover effect, for example, on a button, I can just say, by default, I want my button to be red 500, but on hover, I want it to be BG red 800 and go a little darker. Okay, that's all it takes to do a hover effect. And I can even do dark mode stuff as well. So I can say, well, by default, I want my background to be white, except when I'm in dark mode and I want it to be gray 800. All right. And like I said, this is all configurable. So there's a Tailwind config.js file where you can set all this up. You don't need to do any of this because, like I said, there's a lot of sensible defaults there. And certainly where I am at deployed, we've made very few changes to the default settings. But this is kind of what you do. So this is an example of overriding the color palette. So theme colors, and then I've got various colors here that I've put in. If I wanted to extend it, I would have an outer object between theme and colors, which would say extend. So that would extend what's there with that new set of colors. So really what this could be summarized as is that Tailwind is essentially just Lego blocks for UI design. Okay, you just compose them together to create the look that you want. And if you don't like something, you just swap one out for another one. Okay. So I'm just going to take a drink and we'll talk about this in a second. Now, if you're, what's the word, seasoned like I am, and you've been around for a little while, you'll know that there was a period where inline styles were all the rage, and then we realized they were pretty evil, so we shouldn't do that anymore. And this is usually a question that people have when they're first introduced to Tailwind, okay? This looks like inline styles, Kristen, they're evil. What's the crack? Well, let's talk about the limitations of inline styles. So firstly, inline styles are essentially just magic numbers, magic strings, depending on what property you're manipulating, okay? You're gonna add a style tag to an element, you're gonna type in some properties, and that is it. They're fixed on that element, and if you want those styles somewhere else, you're gonna copy and paste them somewhere else, and then if you want to change them, you're gonna go to every place where they are, and you're gonna manually change them, all right? So that's pretty rubbish. You can't do pseudo states either, okay? So variants in Tailwind, right? So no hover effects or anything like that, no odd and even, color changes on your tables or anything like that. That's not possible with inline styling. And probably the biggest one in modern web development is you can't do media queries. So if you have any need of responsive design, which most people do, you can't do that with inline styles either. So these three things are pretty debilitating if you're trying to build modern web applications. But none of these are a problem in Tailwind because Tailwind is still using CSS classes, okay? They're just very, very focused. Like I said at the start, they're basically focused on a single CSS property and manipulating that one value. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually integrate this with Blazor now. So the first option I'm going to talk to you about is the quickest and the simplest, and that is integrating it using Tailwind's new Play CDN. All right. So with the Play CDN, it's really, really simple. We basically add a single script tag with that URL, and then we just start writing our style classes. Okay. We can just get going. Now, what's really nice here is all of the functionality you're going to get from local development still works. And this is what I think is really cool about this CDN. So it means all the customization stuff that I mentioned earlier, you can still do that with the Play CDN, all right? You just open up a script tag, you create the Tailwind config object, and you just write out whatever custom configuration you want, as you would do with a Tailwind config.js file in local development, and it just works. So you can create this is the extending of the color palette. Okay, so I'm going to add this Blazor purple in, and then I can just start writing classes that use that color, and it just works. All right. Plugins also work. So Tailwind has a rich plugin ecosystem. There's various plugins that are official, and there's a lot of third-party ones as well. The Play CDN only supports the official ones, but they're sort of still quite useful. So in this case, you just add a query string with plugins, and then you just list out the names of the plugins that you want to use. So this is really cool. It's a really good way to get familiar with Tailwind. It's a great way to prototype. It's a great way to decide if it's for you and your company or your project or whatever. The downside here is that it's not for production use, okay? So the Tailwind guys are like, no, you can play around with it, you can try it out, but it's not there for production use. So if you do want to do production use, if you want to build this into a real project, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to go for option 2 here, and that's the Tailwind CLI. Now, the Tailwind CLI historically has always been there through NPM. Okay, so this means having Node installed, and using NPM to build stuff. Now, I know that sometimes when I'm talking to .NET people, they can be a little bit worried about Node, okay, and NPM. I get that, I appreciate that. I've spent a lot of time in the front-end world, it doesn't bother me, but I definitely understand why. However, what I will say is that it's still probably the best way to use Tailwind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compromise. I'm going to show you a way of using it using the modern versions or modern tools in NPM, okay? That mean we're not going to have a big node modules folder or anything like that. We're not going to have a package JSON file, anything like that at all, okay? However, if you absolutely do not want to have Node in any way, shape, or form involved in your machine installations or whatever, then that's cool as well. Because if you go to the releases page of Tailwind's GitHub page, they now do a standalone CLI. So this is standalone executable. Okay, you can download it for Mac, Linux, Windows, and you can just run that instead. Now, the reason I'm not going to use that and I'm not overly keen is because you then have to, if you're using a CI pipeline, for example, you then have to deal with getting that in your pipeline and executing it and whatever. It just becomes a bit of a pain, whereas I think the NPM version is a lot simpler to do. Cool. So on that note, let's check out some code and see how we can actually get Tailwind integrated into a new project. So, right, where are we at here? Aha, cool. So this is a Blazor WebAssembly project, okay? It's a little bit modified because if you've sort of been following Blazor or done anywhere near as much Blazor as I have, you're probably getting quite tired of the standard template, okay? That purple gradient starts to really get to you after a while. So what I've done is I've reimagined it, okay? I've tried to redesign it, make it look a little bit more interesting. So I've ripped out all of the Bootstrap stuff that ships with the default template, and I've applied a load of utility classes already for styling, just because watching me do that is not going to be overly interesting. But what I've not done is set up Tailwind, okay? So we're going to go through that together and see what that looks like. So the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that we do need a Tailwind configuration file. So we're going to use, before I say that, one step, I have installed Node, okay? So that's the first thing. I'm going to use a command called npx, okay? So it's slightly different to npm if you've ever used that before. The nice thing about npx is it's not actually going to download anything into a node modules folder, okay? It works through like a machine cache. So I'm going to ask it to execute certain packages, and it's going to store those in a central cache on my machine. If I've got it already, it will execute it from there. Otherwise, it goes to npm and downloads it if I need to. But it doesn't put anything in my actual project, all right? So I'll execute that first of all, and that's going to create me a Tailwind configuration file. So that's now at the root of my project. This is what the default configuration file looks like. Not got much in it, which is cool. The only thing we really have to do with this is tell it where to look for the files that contain the Tailwind utility classes, okay? And we do it in this content array. So all we have to do here is add in the path. So this is just going to say, scan my directory structure and just find any files that end in .razor or .html. Okay, and that's where my Tailwind classes will be being applied. So that's the configuration file done. The next thing we need to do is create an input CSS file, okay? Because Tailwind's going to compile this into an output CSS file. So I'm going to add a new folder. So we'll call that styles, and we'll add a new style sheet to that. And then I'm going to pop in these 3 lines. So these are directives, okay? And basically, Tailwind will take these and it will convert them into the various utility classes it needs to. It does some other stuff as well. So like in the base stuff, there is things like CSS resets to make sure that everything is even across browsers and stuff like that. But the actual workings of this, you kind of don't really need to care about at this point, okay? So we've got that. That's cool. So now we can go back to our command line, and we're going to run a different command this time. So I'm going to still run npx tailwind CSS. So I'm going to still execute the Tailwind CLI. But this time, I'm going to say, take this input file, so styles app CSS, and then generate me an output file. And I want you to put that in the www root folder css/app CSS, okay? Now, what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to pass in a flag of --watch. So this is basically Tailwind's JIT or hot reload, you can think of it that way. So it's going to watch both that inputs file, so that styles app CSS, and anything that's in that path that we passed into the content array, okay? And it's going to watch for changes and then regenerate that output CSS file every time something changes. So we'll get that going, so that's running. And if we go into the www root folder, and we can see that file here, okay? So this is that output generated file. So you can see some classes that it's already generated here from what's already in the app. So the last thing to get this running is not that, is to go into the host page, and then I just need to put in a link to that output style sheet. All right. So that's it. I've now got Tailwind integrated into my application. So let's run this and see what we get. Cool. So I'm just going to reset the zoom on that a bit. So this is it. This is the new template. So it doesn't look overly interesting at the moment, and that's because we're going to do a bit more styling together so we can see sort of some of the basics of how Tailwind works. But it certainly doesn't have a big purple gradient down the left, so that's progress as far as I'm concerned. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off looking at the headings. So there's that very small hello world, welcome to your new app. So we're going to try and make this look a bit more like, or the hello world bit look more like a heading, and the welcome to your new app look more like a paragraph. So just going to do some basic styling this time. So we're going to go over to Visual Studio again, and we're going to open up that index page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in some styles. So I'm going to say font extra bold, like so, and I need that to be a lot bigger. So we'll say text, and we'll say 7XL because we want something pretty big. And then I want things to be a bit more spaced out because, you know, space is always good. So we'll say tracking wide, and that's just going to put some space between the letters to make everything fill out a bit. And then finally, we want a bit of a margin at the bottom because, you know, just to spread things out. So I'm going to do an MB6. Okay, so we'll save that. Go back over, and hot reload's ruining my life again. I just want to make this clear. I have a very, very hate-hate relationship with hot reload in .NET at the moment, as you can see. And it really does depend which way the wind's blowing as to whether it actually loads or not. There we go, anyway. So that's it. That's now a styled heading, okay? So a few classes later, and I've got something that looks far more like a heading. Okay, so we can do the same thing with the P tag as well, although that's going to be a little bit more sort of more simplistic. So I'm going to pop some bits in there. So we'll say text XL on that one, and this one wants a big margin because of what I've done with it. So we'll put MB20 on that. Cool. So that's now slightly changed. We've got slightly bigger text now for that paragraph and a big margin at the bottom. Okay, so that's just some very simplistic stuff, and I'm just showing you that just to give you a feel of what it's like to do sort of what I would call day-to-day styling, all right? Throw some classes on there. When hot reload is actually working, that's a very quick process and it kind of blips through very fast. So let's do something a bit more interesting. That panel there's a panel there over the right-hand side that you won't be able to see very much at the moment. So it looks very bland, but we want to make this stand out a bit. Now, this is a good opportunity to do something that I can never remember how to do in CSS, and I kind of consider myself relatively decent at CSS, but I can never remember the syntax for doing background gradients. All right, it's just one of them things that I always end up Googling. So let's have a look how we can do this in Tailwind. So this is the markup for that particular piece of UI. So I've added 3 classes here. BG gradient 2BR. So that means it's going to be a background gradient, and it's going to go to the bottom right. It's going to start in the top left, so it's going to go diagonal. And it's going to start with green 400, so from green 400, and it's going to go to blue 500. All right? So we'll save that. And that's it. I've now got a background gradient. All right? On my best day, I cannot code that quick enough in CSS. I cannot get over to a CSS file, create a class, Google, put that, copy and paste off Stack Overflow, and get back to my application, okay? So this is one of the really cool things I think about Tailwind. It makes this stuff really trivial. Let's look at another example of something that can always be a bit interesting, is manipulating elements. So that means twisting them around, moving them about, that kind of stuff. So this kind of unstyled text here is actually the survey prompt that you get in the normal template. So we want to make this look a little bit more interesting, first of all. So let's open that up. And we're going to replace what's there with some more interesting stuff. There we go. So this now looks far more like a banner. That's helpful. It's got, again, a bit of a background gradient there, but we've got an icon and some colors, and it looks more interesting now. But what about if we want to skew this? Okay, so if I want to rotate it, or I want to flip it, or I want to do anything like that. Again, these are things that can be a little bit more challenging when you're doing it with pure CSS. So let's try and rotate this a bit. Right, there we go. 2 classes later. Transform, rotate. I want to transform this element, and I want to rotate it. And I want to rotate it by 3. Now, by default, rotate is going to move it clockwise, but I want to go counterclockwise, so I've got a minus at the front. all right? So we'll do that. We'll go back over. And now we've got a skewed element, okay? So manipulating sort of elements spatially is like I say, it's always one of the things that's a bit more tricky. But 2 classes in Tailwind, and boom, we're there. So at this point, I want to address something that usually people who are new to Tailwind start to think, and that is, well, that's cool, Chris, but haven't I now got to copy all of those classes you applied to that H1 tag to every H1 in my app? And the same for my P tag. And what am I, you know, when I'm styling common elements that are on every page, I've got to put this stuff everywhere. That doesn't sound much better than inline styles, right? Which is a fair point. The other thing is that you wouldn't have seen this yet because I haven't showed you, but this big panel is actually on every page. And again, it's got no styling on these other pages because I haven't copied those styles over. So that's a bit of a pain as well. So we've got 2 problems here. We've got elements that have repeated markup that need to be common across our app, styles that need to be common across our app, and we have repeated markup that needs to be common across our app. So we've got 2 problems, and I've got 2 solutions for you. So the first thing that we're going to look at is going to be dealing with elements that are common across an app that you want to style centrally, because you just don't want to replicate this stuff across all of your various pages. So to do this, I'm going to open up that input style file. Okay, and I'm going to pop in a couple of bits of code here. Hold on, there we go. That one, and then for good measure, we'll do the P tag as well. So this is where I said I'm kind of skirting close to what I said in my promise earlier. I have not written a CSS property. I've technically declared 2 classes, but I haven't written them properly, so I was right, technically right, which is the best kind of right, I think. So the apply directive is a really cool feature of Tailwind because what it does is it allows us to use all the power of that design system and all of the kind of speed of those utility classes, okay, but I still don't have to write CSS properties, all right? And I can get reusability. So I can say now all my H1 tags apply those utility classes and all my P tags apply those utility classes. So we'll save that. If we come back over here, I might need to reload this, but let's have a look. Yeah, so we've got the class showing with the various styles that we put on it originally. So if we go back into the index.razor, we'll get rid of all that because we don't need that now, so we've got it centrally styled. Same on the P tag. Save that. Cool. So everything looks the same. But you can now see in the browser tools, we've got no classes, okay? All centrally styled, nice, get maintainability, we can change things easily. This is really useful for headings, it's really useful for anchor tags, it's really useful for paragraphs, okay? And it's a way of avoiding all that repetition. So that's the answer to the first problem. The second problem was repeated markup, okay? So this is where we've got this panel that's replicated across all the various pages, okay? So how do we deal with that? Well, this is where Blazor comes in, all right? So Blazor is a component-based framework, like most other front-end frameworks. And this is a perfect example of where components are useful. So what I can do is I can create a new component here. So I'll add one in. We'll call this Tailwind. And then inside of here, we'll put in the same markup that we've got replicated across the various pages. All right. So once we've got that, I can save that component. We'll get rid of these other files because we don't really need these anymore. And then I can just replace what I've got here with that component. So I'll do it on the index page. We can do it here on the counter page as well. And I'll also do the same on the fetch data page. So let's scroll down and we'll get that. Cool. So there we go. So we've now got the same component being displayed across all 3 pages. We've got all that duplicated markup now in one place, and we can restyle this however we want. Okay? So those are the 2 solutions to those 2 problems. And they're pretty cool. I think there's a nice, simple way of dealing with those. So everything I've been showing you up till now has been relatively rudimentary, I think. Okay, so you're probably like, okay, can't we do something a little bit more cool? Fair point. So let's talk about animations, all right? So animations usually involve things like JavaScript, and they can be a bit fiddly, and like how do you actually go about doing them and getting them time right and whatever. Agreed. So what I thought we'd do is we will build a component that allows, we can wrap markup and make it slide around, all right? That'll be a cool thing to do. So let's start that. So what we're going to do is this big panel that we've got over there on the right-hand side, we're going to make that slide in, okay? Because it'll just make the page a little bit more interesting when it first loads, and it's a good demo. So we're going to start off with adding a new component. And I'm going to call this imaginatively the slide in component. And then let's put in some markup. So there's a few things going on here. So let me highlight the important stuff to you. First of all, we're going to be using a timer, a .NET timer, all right? None of this is going to involve JavaScript. There's no JavaScript interop going on whatsoever here. And this is what's known in Blazor as a templated component, okay? So what this means is I'm going to wrap some content, and I'm going to want to capture the content I'm rendering so I can put it somewhere in this component's output, and I can manipulate it. And in Blazor, we do this by declaring a component parameter with the name of child content and a type of render fragment. That's a convention. And then what happens is when I wrap it, I can then output whatever's wrapped wherever that, where on line 5 where I'm outputting child content. All right, so that's going to basically output it inside of that div. Okay. Now, we need to style this div with some base stuff. So first of all, I'm saying h full, so I want this to be the height of whatever it's in. All right, so take maximum height, so that's not overly interesting. The next ones are the ones that are fun. So transition, duration 500. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to manipulate two CSS properties. Okay, we're going to change them from one value to another. Now, with transition, when you do that, you can transition those values, those value changes over a period of time. And that's what duration 500 is. It's going to say change those values over a duration of 500 milliseconds. And this is what's going to help us create an animation effect. We've got transform on there as well, because I'm going to want to move this element around. Okay, what I'm going to want to do is slide it off the screen when it first renders, so I can slide it back on. All right, so that's why transform's there. And then I'm outputting the value of a private field here called animation styles. All right, so we haven't got anything in that at the moment. So we need to put some stuff in there to get this going. So the first thing we're going to want in here are the two classes that we're going to start with. So translate x full, okay, is going to move whatever we wrap 100% of its width to the right. Okay, so if we jump back onto our site, it's going to push that off the screen. Okay, to the right-hand side. And then I'm setting opacity to 0. Now, this doesn't mean it removes it from the DOM structure. It's still going to take up the physical space. It just makes it transparent. Okay, so it's going to start all the way to the right and transparent. So what we now need to do is fill in a few of the gaps. So first of all, I need to set up my timer. So I'm going to set this timer up in onInitialized. Okay, it's a lifecycle method on Blazor components. It only runs once. You can think of it a bit like a constructor. And in there, I'm going to set my timer to 300 milliseconds. And then I'm going to say, when it elapses, call this method trigger animation. All right. Now, we haven't added that, so let's add that now. So trigger animation is kind of the thing that does the cool stuff. So what it's going to do is it's going to update animation styles, and it's going to overwrite what's there by default, and it's going to change it to translate x0 and opacity 100. And this is the bit that is kind of going to make all this hang together, okay? Because with transition, we're still manipulating the same CSS properties, okay, under the hood. So what this is going to do, translate x0 is going to move it back to where it was first rendered before we pushed it off to the right, and opacity 100 is going to make it visible again, okay? But it's going to happen over 500 milliseconds, and that's the key point. That's what will create the animation effect. So the last thing we need to do here is actually trigger that animation effect. So we're going to do that using onAfterRender, which is another lifecycle method in Blazor. And we're going to make sure that we only do this once, because we don't want to get like motion sickness with this thing flying in left, right, and center constantly. That's going to be bad. So we're going to start the timer on the first render, and that's it. And I've also set it to auto reset false. So that's our sliding component done. If we come back over to our Tailwind component, we're just going to wrap that. Like so. So let's save that. and let that reload, and we've got a sliding component. So that wasn't too bad. I've not used any JavaScript or anything like that. I've just combined C# and Tailwind in order to create this effect. Now, it's almost sort of, although it's not doing it. Oh, yeah, it's under the screen. Hold on. Waiting for my... OK. Windows 11's toolbar is being joined. So if that toolbar was out of the way, you'd see that actually what's happening at the moment is when I swap between pages, it's actually putting a horizontal scroll bar there, OK? And that's the browser trying to be helpful because it's going, oh, there's something over the right-hand side out of the viewport. You probably want to see that. I'll get you a scroll bar. But obviously, we don't in this case. So we can make a little fix for this. So in my index page, the host page, I can just add overflow x hidden, OK, to the body tag. And that just means anything that's not in the viewport, it's not going to create a horizontal scroll bar for. All right? So that just fixes that problem, although my lack of the toolbar hiding is kind of ruining the effect of that, but take my word for it. So anyway, that is how we can do simple animation effects, okay, with using Blazor and Tailwind together. Now, this is obviously a very simplistic example, but hopefully you can see how you can extrapolate upon this and create something a bit more interesting, a bit more reusable. You could define other parameters that set which direction it was going to come in from. You could have a parameter to change the duration, so it did it over a longer or a short period of time and stuff like that. This just kind of give you an idea of what's possible. So, next thing, dark mode. A must-have for every modern website, app, or anything. So dark mode is something that I'm a big fan of. This is not dark mode. This is very, very light. So let's fix that, OK? Let's make this into, or let's have this site have a dark mode option. This is actually going to be relatively painless. So I'm going to come back over to Visual Studio here, open up the Tailwind config, and I'm just going to add in an extra bit of configuration here. So let me find my snippet. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. That's it. So dark mode, I'm going to set, oh, actually, no, I'm not going to. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I don't even need to do that. I'm just going to come in with browser settings. And I'm going to set to my system default, which is dark mode, and I've got dark mode. That's too simple even for me for a minute there, and I wrote this talk. So the reason for that is that, as I mentioned at the start, with Tailwind v3 in the JIT mode, every variant is turned on by default. And dark mode is a variant, OK? Like I showed you earlier, you can just put dark : in front of any class, and it will get applied when dark mode's active. Now, by default, dark mode is turned on based on system preference or browser preference, whichever one you happen to be using. Now, I've already styled this with dark mode classes, OK? So that's why this has happened. I'd love that Tailwind would be sensible enough to somehow generate magically a dark mode site, but unfortunately, I did actually have to do this. So I haven't styled the title bar there, so let's quickly just go through that, just so I can show you exactly what goes on. So you can see the outer class here. We've got BG white, and then on the links, they've got a certain color of purple and stuff like that. So we basically can just replace that with some slightly different markup. And there you got BG white, but now you're saying when it's dark mode, do gray 700. All right, that's how you get these dark mode alternatives. So if we do that, let that reload, and now I've got a dark mode header. All right, so that's how you apply those classes. Like I say, watching me do that is not going to be overly interesting. So that's cool, but the kind of downside about this is that you are kind of stuck with this based on system preference. Having to go into your browser sort of settings and toggle between light and dark mode is a little bit of extra work that we don't want to necessarily have to do. So it would be much nicer if the user could just decide if they want light or dark mode with the toggle. So let's build a toggle component in order to make this a bit more friendly for user choice. Now, to do this time around, we do have to go to Tailwind's config file, and we do have to add in dark mode class. So we do this because, like I said, by default, it'll work off your system preference. But when you set dark mode to class, what this means is that there needs to be a class called dark somewhere in your HTML structure, and any elements that are child elements of that will then have their dark variants applied. All right? So now I've applied that, you can see that the CLI's kicked in, it's done a reload, and now I'm not getting any dark mode stuff applied, all right, because it's not got that class anywhere. So if I open up my browser tools, and let's just come up here to the top, and where I've got this h-full, if I add a dark class, like that, then everything goes back into dark mode, right? And that is basically what we need to do with our component. We need to write a component that is going to toggle that class on and off, okay, when someone interacts with our toggler. So let's go and have a look at that. So first things first, let's add a new component. We'll call it dark mode toggle. And then we'll pop in the initial markup, okay? So I'm injecting some stuff at the top there. The key one at the moment that I'll point out is the IJS runtime. Unfortunately, this time around, I am going to have to use some JavaScript. There's nothing I can actually do about this. I just can't manipulate that HTML element from Blazor. It doesn't have any sight or control of that. So I'm going to do that with some JavaScript. The local storage thing we'll talk about in a minute. After that, we've got the div, which is actually the thing that's going to render our little toggle switch. So there's a lot of markup here that's going on, but the key thing that makes this work is that we're using a trick here. So we've got a label with a for tag, and we've got a hidden input, okay, that's attached to that label. So the label's going to be the thing we click that's going to look like a slider, but it's actually just going to pass that click onto that hidden input. So that's a checkbox, and over here, we're handling that event. So whether that is toggled on or off is going to be based on whether this dark mode property we've got is true or false. So the checked attribute is set based on that value. And then whenever that checkbox value changes, we're going to call this toggle theme method, okay? And that's going to be the thing that's going to do the work to actually add or remove that class. Cool. So if we just save that for now, and let's actually just quickly have a look what this looks like. So we'll add this into the markup. Cool. So up there, top right-hand side, you can just see there's a little toggle going on. So it starts to look like a toggle and everything. And we're going to click that, and it's going to swap back and forth based on whatever preferences we have. So let's actually do something to make this work. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the JavaScript bit out of the way. So I'm going to add a new file here, come down, find JavaScript, and I'm going to use a new feature in .NET 6, which is called co-located JavaScript. So this is pretty neat. So I can say dark mode toggle, which is the name of my component, .razor.js. And then Visual Studio is going to very nicely nest it for me over there. And what's cool about this is I get to keep my JavaScript with the component that's using it. All right, this is a pretty cool feature. And then tied in with the support that Blazor has for JS modules, I don't actually have to put a reference to this JS file anywhere in my application. Blazor's just going to load it for me dynamically whenever I actually try to import the module. All right. So let's put in the initial markup. So I'm going to export a single function out of this module. It's called setTheme. It takes a theme as a string. If it's dark, it adds that dark class to the HTML element, or if it's not, it removes it. Okay, very simple. That's it. That's all the JavaScript we're doing. So we'll get rid of that now. So we now need to import that module into this component so we can actually call that method when we need to. So let's add in some code to do that. So first thing, I've got a private field here, IJS object reference is its type. That's how we store references to JavaScript objects in Blazor. And then I've got on after render async. This is where you should always do all your JavaScript interop. And inside of there, I'm using the JS runtime, and I'm calling invoke async, and then I'm calling a special function called import. Okay, and then the second argument I'm passing here is basically the path to that particular file. Right, so that's going to import that file into my app so I can use it inside of this component. Now, being a responsible programmer, I'm also going to implement iasync disposable, because when I'm doing anything with JavaScript object references, I need to make sure I dispose of them properly so I don't get memory leaks. So we'll do that now quickly. So we're going to say if the theme module isn't null, then we'll dispose of that. So that's the responsible programmer bit done. And then I'm going to update this toggle theme method. So this code is kind of quite straightforward, really. What we're going to do is we're going to get the value from whatever the checkbox value is, okay? And then we're going to set the dark mode property field based on that. If we're in dark mode, it's going to pass down the string dark. Otherwise, it's going to pass down light. And then we're just calling that set theme function with whatever the value is, all right? So now that's done, we have now got a working toggle. All right, so we can click on that, and that's going to switch us between light and dark mode, and that's all it's doing is adding and removing that dark class on that HTML element. So that's pretty cool. The only downside here is that if I set it to dark mode and I refresh the page, it goes back to light mode, and that's because there's no mechanism here for it to remember what my settings are. So that's a bit rubbish because I'd have to toggle this on all the time. So we can make a slight improvement here. So this is where that iLocal storage service comes in. This is a shameless plug for Blazor local storage, one of my packages. So this allows you to interop with the local storage APIs, okay, using pure C#. You don't have to do any JavaScript stuff. So install the NuGet package, register the service, and inject it in, and you can just start interacting with local storage. So what we can do is we can just, in the toggle theme method, after we set the theme, we can then just call local storage, and we can set a new key called theme with whatever the value is, okay? And that will just persist that into local storage for us. So we can then go and get that next time. So that's what we'll do finally in this on after render. We'll go up here and we'll actually add in the code to go and get that out. So on the first render of this component, we're going to go into local storage, put that in the middle, and we're going to look for a key called theme. We're going to get the value out, and then we're going to set dark mode based on that value, and then finally we're going to call set theme. So we set it initially to whatever the saved value was. Okay. So if I come into my app now and I set to dark mode and I refresh, it stays in dark mode. Okay. So if I come over here to my app, you can see that I've got this theme key with a value of dark, and that's where it's pulling it from. So as I toggle that, you can see that value change as I go. So that's pretty cool. We've been able to create a nice toggle component. We've been able to store the value so we don't have to toggle it back and forth each time. So that's pretty successful. I'm quite happy with what we've got here in this site. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is how do you actually go to production with this? All right, how do you integrate this into a CI build or whatever? Well, you've got a couple of options. If you're going to go the NPM route that I've been showing you, you could just add a new step into your build pipeline. Okay, so you could install Node, you could run NPM, and you could run that same command I showed you in your pipeline, and then you can go on to the step that actually builds your project. So that's one way of doing it. But there's also another way you can do it, which I'll show you here quick, which is that you can do this using MS Build. So inside of the CS proj file, I'm going to add a couple of targets here. So the first one, this top one here, that's kind of a bit of a safety check. All that's going to do is run the npm-v command to make sure that Node's installed. So if Node isn't there, it's going to foul the build. All right, and that's because otherwise we wouldn't get an output CSS file. The more interesting one is the next one. Okay, so this build CSS target. So this is going to run before the compile step. So this is going to run before the app gets built. And what it's going to do is it's going to run that same npx command that we were running from the command line, and it uses the same input. So we have the input of the input style file, and then we have the output style file. The difference here, though, is at the end, instead of using --watch, I'm using --minify. And that's because obviously I don't need to watch this file. I'm not doing more development in my pipeline. But I do want to minify it. Okay? And the cool thing about the CLI is it comes with minifying built in. And that's because under the hood, it's actually using post-CSS. Okay? So Tailwind is actually a post-CSS plugin, which means a lot of other post-CSS plugins are available to you, and Minify is one of them. And they've bundled that into the CLI, so you don't have to do extra stuff. As a bit of a sanity check as well, I have put a condition on this to say that only execute this target if we're in a release build. All right, so when I'm doing local dev, this isn't going to accidentally be going off. So if we put that in place, we can hopefully see this working. So if I go over to my terminal, I'll cancel that watch that we had before, If I change over to release mode now and build, and then we'll go have a look at that output CSS file. And there you go. We now have a minified version of our CSS file. All right, minified and as small as it could possibly be. Nice one. So on that note, what we got time-wise? That's my book. If anyone's interested, I'll just get this out of the way. There is a discount code if you do want to buy it and stuff. But otherwise, the slides and the code you can get at that URL. Thank you for watching. If you do have any questions, I think we've got a minute or two. But yeah, otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.